Get into this evening's lesson. Well, what are we going to be looking at? Well, composition is one of the most fundamental elements in photography. Composition refers to the placement and the relationship of elements within a picture. It's the arrangement of elements in the scene, the angle that they're shot at, the distance that the photograph is taken from, all of these factors, and these can completely change the final outcome of a photograph. Composition can ultimately determine the difference between what's a good picture and a bad picture. Sorry guys, I've a frog in my throat. I'm just going to mute myself for just 10 seconds, okay? Okay, my apologies about that. Can everybody hear me there again? Excellent. My apologies. Just had to mute myself there for just a moment. Now, sorry, as I was saying there. So composition can ultimately determine the difference between a good picture and a bad picture. Understanding how to explore all the compositional possibilities of a scene will greatly improve your ability to capture the best photographs. And really what you're going to see as well after this lesson is, even if you don't have your camera on you, you're going to start looking at everything a little bit differently and wondering how you would compose a particular scene as a photograph. You might be doing that already. It's a you know, as photographers, it just becomes second nature to you. But during this lesson, we'll discuss the difference between looking and actually seeing, exploring the subject for a best composition and finding the shot. You know, the shots are there, you just have to find them, okay? So we'll discuss various compositional tools and techniques that you can draw on when you're finding it difficult to get a good shot. And even the most interesting subject in the world can be photographed badly. So like any good craftsperson, you'll develop a set of skills to fully utilize and take advantage of every photo opportunity. I saw somebody mention there, they're living in the States. Oh, I forget the state now that you said, but you're saying you're living on a farm and there's nothing but fields that have been ploughed around you to photograph. You after this lesson, hopefully you will be able to photograph that as well. It could be, that's a little bit more challenging, but certainly, you know, when you understand your composition and that as well, hopefully it'll make you see that in a new light. Okay, so again, like all art forms, photography is subjective. So you may see something in a picture that the person next to you may not. And a picture may have much more meaning to you because of the content than it does to someone unfamiliar with the shot. And these are things that we need to keep in mind when we're making our own pictures. You will need to know how to translate your vision beyond what we see ourselves. Or we may just want to make sure that the main subject on our image is apparent and clear to the viewer. Remember, we're communicating with our photography, so we need to be able to communicate effectively. So we'll have our summary and we'll have our Q&A at the end as well, as per usual too. So why learn about composition? Well, as I just said, really, if you don't have a good communication of your vision, you want to be able to communicate what you are photographing, you know, with good compositional skills. Your visual awareness will increase, and your visual awareness is your ability to be able to communicate visually what you are seeing. So when you take a photograph, somebody is going to understand what it is you're trying to photograph. I mean, have you ever stood in front of a picture and wondered what the picture is of? You know, have you ever struggled to see the point of a photograph sometimes, you know? And, you know, that happens to us all. And, you know, David is saying there, yes, absolutely. And it does happen to us. And that can often be because, well, perhaps the photographer wants it to be that way for some artistic reason, but quite often it's just a bad composition. It's just a lack of being able to communicate the message of the photograph through a fundamental lack of understanding of composition. So this is why we need to understand it. You're going to be able to get a lot more creative as well, you know, by improving your composition, and you'll be able to take full advantage of any subject and its potential when you improve your compositional techniques. Okay, so We're going to develop our compositional skills, expand our visual awareness, and we'll also broaden our compositional vocabulary and our photographic vocabulary as well, and just expand our skills. So let's get right into it. So what is composition? Well, we all shoot for different reasons. We are all here, whether we want to take better photographs of our family, whether we want to get into it professionally. We all shoot for different reasons, and we all like to shoot and capture different things. However, what makes us take pictures is that we usually see something that sparks an interest in us, and we're usually trying to capture this and communicate this. A lot of the time, sticking a camera in front of the subject and taking a shot doesn't always capture that thing that sparked our interest and doesn't communicate it to the viewer. This happens to us where we see something amazing, we take a photograph of it, and it just doesn't look great. It looks boring, and we show that picture to somebody else, and they just don't see the what it was that we saw in the picture at the time. So you capture images within this rectangular frame, and everything outside of that frame, might have led you to capture that image or make the subject important to capture is irrelevant to the viewer. We're making a very clear decision about what we put into the frame and what we leave out of the frame as well. The viewer reads the contents within that frame to try and recognize and understand what it is that you are showing them. And good images and good communication rely on how you compose the image. What you choose to put in the frame or what you choose to exclude from the frame determines what the viewer learns or reads from your image. You have a lot of power as a photographer by making these decisions as what you put in and what you don't put into the photograph. Good composition relies on you to arrange the visual elements in the scene in a way that guides the viewer's eyes, and it brings attention to your subject, whatever it is in the photograph that you want to communicate. In a well-composed picture, the subject should be apparent and clear, like this photograph here. Very, very simple composition, but it's very, very clear what the subject is in this particular photograph. In a bad composition, your eye is going to wander and search all over the photograph to try and understand what the subject is in the photograph. And the classic sign of a bad composition, as I mentioned, is when you find yourself thinking, what am I supposed to be seeing here? That's a really, really good, if you're asking yourself that question, well, composition may be the first thing that you need to consider, if the composition is good or bad. So, how many of you guys have old family photographs or vacation photographs where the people's heads are chopped off or the feet are missing from the bottom of the frame and everybody is standing to one side, or they're just, and I can see everybody, Elka's saying LOL, Sam you're saying yeah, Mary you're saying I do. This happens to all of us. You might have your grandparents' photographs and or your parents' photographs. We all experience this. I certainly can think of a lot of them from when I was a child. But if you remember back in lesson 2, we looked at the difference between what the lenses see and what we see. And if you think about that big 130-degree angle of view that we spoke about when we were talking about our vision, and that our eyes only see a small 50-degree view that's actually in focus when we are looking, our vision developed this way so that we not have to take in the full detail of every object in our field of view. If we were to see every object clearly and in full detail, if you imagine if everything was sharp, everything that's in our peripheral vision, our brains would be on fire trying to process all this extra information all the time in every situation that we were in every minute of the day. And that's why we have this nice, small, defined angle of view. To just take in a small part and process the important stuff. Peripheral vision, as I mentioned previously, is just a security or a survival instinct that we develop. So we were always somewhat aware of our surroundings and what might be happening just outside of our focused angle of view. Well, our eyes work exactly the same when a camera is in front of it. When we have a camera to our eye, all of our attention is focused on a small area of the frame, and we may not necessarily be concentrating on the entire scene. So the very first important thing to do to start training yourself in terms of improving your composition is to move your eye all the way around the frame. Okay, so move your eye all the way around the frame when you have your camera. If you're whether you're using the LCD screen or whether you are using your camera's viewfinder, try and develop looking around the whole frame to make sure that you're aware of every element that is in the shot and knowing whether or not you want it there. Has this ever happened to you? I know it's happened to me. You take a load of pictures, you put them on your computer, you get home, and you actually find that there's something in the photograph that you didn't even see at the time when you were taking the picture. And maybe it's a happy accident, maybe it's a good thing. Usually it's not, though. Usually it's something you didn't want in the picture at all. So you do need to be be aware of this. Move your eyes to the edges of the frame as well. Make sure that you explore the entire LCD or the viewfinder, that there's not something in the picture that you weren't aware of, and you don't get any nasty surprises a little bit later on. So just take that extra half a second just to move your eye around the frame. So let's explore the subject and the scene now. Once we've got that basic step down, just simply move your eye around the LCD. Let's have a look at exploring a scene, how we might approach a scene as a photographer. So we already discussed capturing that thing that caught our attention and sparked an interest in us. It isn't as simple as pointing the camera and taking a snap from where you are. There may be some occasions when you're exactly in the right position, distance, height, etc. from the subject. You do get that best shot, but this is rare enough. And how do you know that's the best shot unless you explore all the possibilities? Okay, so if you're as photographers, I mentioned we chase the light. We're also explorers. Okay, we're exploring the world around us because we're trying to find the photograph. The photographs are out there; they're just hidden. We just have to find them. So if you simply see something that really interests you and you only make one picture from one position, then you're not really doing your composition and your photography skills any justice. And you'll find it much more difficult to develop your visual skills. So it's important to explore the scene or subject for different shots. So this means getting in closer or stepping back, getting higher or getting lower. You take a straight shot on, or you might go for a totally crazy angle, but it's difficult to know what works unless you experiment. And again, this is the kind of thing that you will develop as your visual awareness increases, okay? But you really need to practice at looking at all the possibilities of a subject in order for these skills to develop. So the next time you see something, walk around it, look at all the angles and take the shots. You have nothing to lose, absolutely nothing to lose. And even bad shots will help that critical analysis of your work. And you'll get a sense of what does and doesn't work. So let's put that into practice, okay? So here is an example of exploring the subject, and these are photographs I shot during a very cold winter here in Ireland in 2010. Okay, so going back 7 years ago now at this stage, very, very memorable winter, the fierce winter of 2010. We'll be saying that for a long time to come. I was just out for a walk and I had my camera with me, and there was one particular tree that caught my eye, and I knew there was some potential in it. And I think it was a combination of the shape of the tree, the snow, but obviously the key thing here as well is the tire swing. So I took I took a snap from the position that I was in. And looking back at the picture on the camera's LCD, I knew that it wasn't right, and there must be a better way to compose a shot to illustrate the thing that caught my eye. So as we were just talking about, the logical thing to do was to start to move around and to explore the subject from different angles and different positions. Okay, so is everybody still with me so far, just before we start exploring this tree? Excellent. Excellent, great stuff. Okay, so the first thing I decided to do was to explore the tire swing. As I mentioned, this was kind of one of the key elements of this scene that drew me towards the subject in the first place. So I took some shots isolating the tire swing. It's not the worst shot in the world, but I felt it definitely didn't say the same thing as when the entire tree was in the shot. So, we're losing a lot of this scene in this particular photograph. The tire swing on its own is an interesting element here, but it's I like the snow and I like the tree, and they're not really being represented in this particular photograph. So while I was up close, I tried framing the shot slightly differently. So I changed the format. Okay, so as in I switched the camera from vertical to horizontal. This often can be all you need to do, when you're changing, just a simple small little change like this. It's a very small little thing, but some people do forget to do this in the moment. Simply changing from what we call landscape or portrait, okay? Changing your camera from horizontal to vertical, this is known as landscape and portrait format. So landscape format is when we have the photograph as a horizontal like this, and portrait is when we have the photograph as vertical. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be a portrait that you're photographing in a portrait format. You could shoot a landscape in a portrait format if you want to as well. These are simply just the terms that we use when we were talking about shooting horizontally or shooting vertically instead. Okay, guys, I'm just going to I'm going to have to grab another very, very quick sup of water. My apologies. I'm going to be back in just 1 second. Hi guys, my apologies about that. Just want to make sure everybody can still hear me there again. So just type, there we go, excellent, excellent. So my apologies about that. Just had to take just a quick break there. Okay. Now, sorry, so as I was saying, I changed from the portrait to the landscape format instead. I actually thought the portrait version of this photograph worked a little bit better, but it's too close. The issue here, I think, is I'm too close. So let's explore it a little bit further, okay? So I went back a little bit further to try and bring all these elements together. Again, returning to the vertical or the portrait format, brought back in that branch that was holding up the tire swing, okay? So that branch is an important element to this photograph as well. So I included some more of the tree on the right as well. And again, being interested in the shape that the snow formed against piled against the tree as well. This is also another interesting visual element here too. So at this point, I still thought there was room for improvement, and I decided to, explore and walk around the scene a little bit more. So the next shot was at just a slightly different angle. And again, we went with the landscape format here, but what do we think, guys? Do we think that this one works? No, absolutely not. No, this one really isn't working now here at all, okay? So going back to the landscape format here, I just didn't feel that this one worked at all. A large branch exiting the frame on the right just looks odd, and the new position of the tire swing has just a feeling of bad positioning, okay? So overall, it is just a poor composition, and you need to allow your eye to find the main subject or point to the image. But here, that branch on the right-hand side is just leading us out of the frame, okay? It's leading us out of the photograph, okay? So think about how you read a picture. And, that branch on the right-hand side really is just taking us out of it completely, okay? So this certainly didn't work at all. So decided to go back shooting wide and from a distance, and my view of the subject, which sparked the initial interest, was from far away, and maybe this was the view that I would like to make this scene work. So initially, when I walked by this scene, I was far away from it, and I started from far away. Okay, so I went back to being at the far away. So I walked around until I found an angle that illustrated the nice shape of the tree, but also still included the tire swing. And now you can also see, and some people mentioned it already, that footprints are a problem. Okay, and footprints, they've started to come into this because I've been walking around this scene. I've had an influence now over the scene here as well, and you can see all these footprints that have come into the shot. Okay, I kind of like this though, however, but I think there's still too much space on the right, and it really wasn't doing anything on the shot. A lot of kind of empty, negative space over there on the right-hand part of the shot. Also, I felt from this angle that maybe the main tree, which I was interested in, was getting a little bit lost in all the other trees beside it. Okay, so from this angle, so for the next shot, I'd move slightly around to the right, trying to find the angle where the shape of the trees didn't blend so much with the trees in the background. I knew at this point that I was on to something. I was starting to capture the interesting shape of the snow-covered tree. I was keeping the tire swing in, and the footprints in the snow, they're still here in the foreground as well. I also like that little bit of light that's coming now here through the branches at the top of the tree as well, but decided I could push this a little bit further. Okay, so quickly changing from landscape back to vertical as well. I felt there was something more in this as I had all the components of what I wanted to include. Now, the issue here for me in this shot is that the footprints are now starting to get a little bit too messy in the foreground. So there's far too many footprints now happening here in this foreground. This is my own fault, for walking around so much, exploring the different angles. But if I could find a workaround for them, then I would have my shot. So, moving around, slightly different angle, going a little bit wider to bring back that branch on the right, and tilting my view up a little to get rid of some of the footprints. It all came together to get this shot, and for me, this is the one that worked. So you can see the amount of exploration that happened here to achieve this photograph. Okay, so talking and analyzing this whole walk around might make the process of composing an image seem a little bit complicated, but all of this really happens in about 5 minutes or so. So it's this kind of critical thinking and analysis you'll make in the moment, and you'll walk around exploring the subject and making shots in a matter of minutes. So take your time, relax, and enjoy the process of the experiment. As I said, as photographers, we are explorers. However, sometimes you do have to push yourself a little bit more to explore the subject, and not just walk away and give up if you cannot get the shot in 1 or 2 shots. Push yourself as photographers. So think, as I just said, as explorers, seeking out and finding great shots. Every time you try something new, it gets added to your toolbox of compositional skills. You'll be able to draw on that for the next time you are faced with a tricky subject. Okay, so I see a lot of people were asking me there a little bit before the lesson, are we going to cover the rule of thirds? Absolutely, we are going to cover the rule of thirds. So now that we've explored the scene a little bit more, we found that we do need to explore the scene to get the most out of it. We need to change from shooting portrait and shooting from landscape. There are a couple of guidelines that we can use to help improve our compositions as well. So, as we already discussed, capturing that thing that caught your attention and sparked an interest isn't as simple as just pointing the camera and taking a snap from where you are. There may be some occasions where you're exactly in the right height and space and so on, but it is really, really rare enough, as we have said. But we can use certain compositional rules and guidelines to help improve our composition as well. So how many of you have heard of this term before, the rule of thirds? I know a lot of people were mentioning this a little bit earlier on. Excellent, lots. Yeah, loads of people saying they have heard of this before. If you haven't heard of this before, that's absolutely fine. We're going to break this down for you now. It's a very, very useful guideline. Now, it's called the rule of thirds, but within photography, when we speak about rules, generally we would refer to them as guidelines, okay? So it's not something you have to strictly follow, but it really, 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 really will help you improve your composition straight away. So the rule of thirds is a basic guideline which applies to composing photographs. The concept is that an image should be imagined as divided into 9 equal parts. 9 equal parts. Equally I'll say that again. They're divided into 9 equal parts by 2 equally spaced horizontal lines. So we've got 2 equally spaced horizontal lines and then 2 equally spaced vertical lines as well. Okay, so it breaks the photograph down into 9 different sections. And important compositional elements should be placed along these lines or at their intersections. Okay, so it has always been said that aligning a subject with these points creates more tension, more energy, and more interest in the composition than simply centering the subject. Okay, now this is just an imaginary grid that you place over the scene and you use it to place the objects around the scene. Okay, now you probably have seen this on the back of your camera's LCDs as well. A lot of cameras will give you the option of turning on this grid, and it's very, very useful to use, okay? Now, I see a couple of people mentioning the golden ratio, the Fibonacci spiral, the Da Vinci spiral, and so on. I'll talk about that at the end of the lesson and its place in all of this as well. For the moment, though, we'll stick with the rule of thirds. But you can switch it. This on nearly every single camera has this option now where you can use the rule of thirds. It's a grid. Belinda's just said it there. I keep the grid on my camera. Is that cheating? Absolutely not. This is really, really very, very useful for photographers. And if you can understand it, you will see an improvement in your composition. So this is something you will need to practice as well, as it can be difficult to imagine at first. So if you do have it as an option on your cameras to switch on, I do recommend to do that. Otherwise, you will have to imagine it. And again, it's just a guideline. It's not set in stone, but it will definitely help you and help your compositional skills to develop as well. So this image here demonstrates the application of the rule of thirds. The horizon sits on the horizon line dividing the lower 2/3 of the photographs from the upper 2/3. So you can see how that horizon line is pretty much straight across here on that top horizontal line. Okay, but we can then see that the second, the dusty edge of the beach nearly touches the second horizontal line as well. Points of interest in the photograph as well. They don't actually have to touch one of these lines to take advantage of the rule of thirds. For example, the boat here over on the left hand side, it's not falling directly on the intersection, but it is very, very close to that intersection as well. So same with the elements here, these little beach chairs as well. They're close enough, and the mountain here as well, close enough to the intersections that they are following the rule of thirds. Does everybody understand that so far? Marion, you're saying you've some dots in your viewfinder. Is this the rule of thirds? No, they're your focus points. So we'll speak about focus points in lesson 9. Sean, you're saying so far, so good. Brilliant. Okay, so again, this is another good example of the rule of thirds. So let's put a grid over this and see what it looks like. So you can see the horizontal lines, or the horizontal lines, sorry, fall just around the lines of the mountain here at the top. We've got the second horizontal line going across the pier here as well. Then we've got these other compositional elements falling very close to the intersections. So we have this pier, this lighthouse at the end of the pier here too. Okay, and that's falling very, very close to that intersection there. Then we also have this gentleman here as well, and he's falling very, very close to that point of intersection too. So you see, these elements don't have to be falling exactly on the points of intersection to follow the rule of thirds, but once they are close to it, you're going to have a very strong composition. Now, not every single photograph is going to fall as well placed as this particular one. And Satya, you're asking, is it applicable only for landscape photography? No, it's absolutely applicable to portrait photography as well. And we'll see that in just a second. The rule of thirds doesn't even need to be as obvious as the examples as we have just seen there. Again, we can have a really, really simple shot like of this hanging chain here. And as you can see, the chain is simply placed about a third into the scene and runs along that imaginary vertical line. So we don't have any other elements here in the photograph. We simply have that that vertical line of the chain. And if you were to stick the grid over this, we would know as well that this is falling on that vertical line. And you can see it's a very, very simple composition, but this is still considered a good composition as well. And Satya, you were just asking, does the rule of thirds can it only be applied to landscape photography? No, we can also apply it when we're shooting in portrait. Now, when I say portrait in this particular instance, I'm talking about shooting in a vertical format. So again, if we place our imaginary grid over the photograph, we can see that the head is at an intersecting point in the grid. Okay, so we can see that it's falling on that intersection there at the grid. So again, the rule of thirds can be applied to an image as simple as this by placing the seal's head at this point. It creates a sense of logical placement as well. Okay. And Antonita, you're saying you like that chain picture, and you can see how simple it can be. And Elka, you're just asking, so you want the subject to fall on one of the two third lines. Somewhere close to it, yeah, either falling on it or close to it, Elka. Once it's within that kind of space, the main thing here, I suppose I want to stress, is that you don't want to have it fall directly in the center. Some photographs that's going to work, not every single photograph it's going to work, okay? Viola, you're asking, how does this apply to food photographs? The exact same way. This technique can be applied to every single photograph that you can think, any type of photography that you can think of. This is a very fundamental rule, a very, very fundamental guideline that you can follow no matter what type of photography it is that you apply. Okay? So Jill, so you're saying, so horizons go in their horizontal lines and subjects go in an intersecting of the squares. Basically, yeah, basically, Jill. As I said, it's a very kind of simplified kind of guideline. When it's obviously you're going to see it most effective within landscape photography, but you can apply it to this type of photograph as well. So, understanding our rule of thirds a little bit more, the next thing that we really need to be aware of as photographers is what's called balance. Balance in our photographs. You may have heard somebody say the photograph doesn't have any balance, or it's an unbalanced picture. You might not have been sure about exactly what it is that they were referring to. Balance is incredibly important to us when we are composing a photograph. So, what is balance? Well, here is a very, very nice landscape photograph. The combination of the rocks in the foreground and the sea with the lighthouse on the island all come together to create a very strong visual image. What you may not notice now, mainly because it's not an issue, but this image has balance. Every element in your image carries what's called a compositional weight. Now, this is not a physical weight, but a visual weight. So if we have a strong visual element on one side of our image and nothing on the other side of this, it can throw the image out of balance, and it can create the sense that something is wrong or missing in the composition. Visual weight can be created by an object, by a tone, or by a color. Don't worry if this seems like a strange concept, as we'll be looking at some examples of how this works. I'm telling you guys, when you see an unbalanced photograph, it makes way more sense than a balanced one, okay? So in this image, we have a lot of strong elements all carrying these different compositional weights. The sky, the water, the rocks in the foreground are all similar in size within composition. However, the rocks in the foreground carry more weight because they are much darker in tone, and they have much more detail, and they have texture as well. And this is particularly true of the rocks on the left of the frame. Those rocks on the left of the frame, these are much darker, and because of this, your eye is drawn to them. However, what balances this out is that the lighthouse on the island on the top right of the frame, The little island is very similar in tone to the rocks on the left of the frame, so our eyes move from the bottom of the frame to the island on the right with ease. This means our eyes go around the entire photograph, and this is where balance is created. Again, if this is a new concept to you, it might not make a lot of sense at the moment until you really start looking for it in your images. And let's see how this image changes if we were to remove one of these compositional weights, if we were to remove the balance from the photograph. So, in this image, I've used Photoshop to remove the island. Vanished, okay, gone. So, and the image might still seem like a nice, strong visual photograph, but if you begin to think about how your eye scans this, you'll probably find that your eye is making its way back to those dark rocks on the left. What do we think? Jonathan, you're saying bring it back. Yeah. Well, this is straight away when we remove that, the lighthouse. Those rocks on the left are really, they're taking our eyes. Our eyes are just drawn to that, okay? It's still a reasonably nice photograph. Cathy, you're saying it's not as interesting. It's a bit empty. Anthony, you're absolutely spot on. It's missing something. And what it's missing is the balance, okay? Because of the weight, the compositional weight of the rocks on the left, and it's primarily due to their tone, our eye is drawn to them and it doesn't know where to go next. It's always going to come back to the rocks. Your eye might explore for a moment, but it's always going to come back to the rocks. And the rocks are not the primary subject in the scene, so it's not a desirable place for your viewer's eye to end up. Does this make sense? Okay, is this quite clear in terms of what balance is? You don't want one object in the photograph to be drawing your viewer's eye all the way over on the right or the left-hand side of a picture. You need something to balance it. And Darryl, you're saying we want the lighthouse back. Well, what happens if we do bring back the lighthouse? So let's just look at this image again. We'll bring the lighthouse back. Now try to be conscious of how your eyes move around the scene. You'll probably find that your eyes move from the dark rocks on the left up to the island on the top right of the image. There is a stronger sense of balance, and your eyes are not just being drawn back to the left-hand side of the scene. Your eyes are being moved around the entire scene, and that is what balance is. Okay, so balance can appear in our photographs. This is a really good example of it. It can be a little bit trickier to find perhaps in some other photographs, but it's just a case of trying to draw it out of the photograph. So here's an example. This is an Ansel Adams photograph, a really good photograph of from Ansel Adams. All of his photographs are great, but it's a really good example of balance. So can anybody tell me what's balancing this photograph? Okay, so what are the compositional weights in this particular scene? Okay, excellent. So David, yeah, you're saying it there. Mandy is saying it there as well. Yeah, excellent. So the mountain and the lake are the primary elements that are balancing this particular photograph, okay? And this is because of the tone of them. So this is an example of how tone can be used to balance a composition. The mountain at the top of the scene carries a lot of compositional weight because it's so bright in tone. But this is really nicely balanced by that bright lake in the foreground. So the mountain's actually, being reflected in that lake. But because of the tone, because they're similar in tone, we have this nice balance. If the lake was to be, say, dark, or the lake wasn't there at all, well, then we would perhaps have what's an unbalanced photograph. That dark area in the middle of the scene separates the mountain and the lake. But if the lake wasn't there, the foreground was all dark, we'd lose the balance, and more likely the tone of the mountain would mean that it keeps pulling your eyes away to the top of the screen. Okay, so balance can be really, really subtle here too, as well. I love this photograph. In this image, the tree is on the bottom right, carries a huge amount of compositional weight because it's a very prominent feature and because it's tonally much darker than everything else. Okay, however, From a compositional point of view, it's rebalanced by the moon in the top left corner, the very, very subtle moon in the top left corner here. Okay, what also really works here as well is that we have this lovely gradient of tone and colour leading us up through the photograph as well. So these two elements are balanced with each other, and we have this lovely colour here as well that certainly adds to the scene to help us bring our eyes through the entire scene. So this allows you to enjoy the entire scene and not just focus all your attention to one element within the frame. It keeps your eyes moving and exploring the picture. This is what generally will keep you coming back to a photograph as well when you've got this good compositional weight in the photograph. If you ever find yourself drawn to a particular photograph and you're not sure what it is, start to have a look at the composition, start to think about these elements of how the photograph, the compositional weight of it is and all of that. This is going to help you to improve your critical eye, with your own photography, but indeed with other photographers' works as well. Okay, so is everybody still with me? Excellent. Brilliant. Okay, so now that we've explored our rule of thirds and we've also had a look at compositional weights and balances, let's have a look at looking at just our point of view, our different angles. So if you're out shooting all day and you're finding great shots, you're getting all these interesting subjects, you've got some nice balance in your shots and all that, but as you walk around, you put the camera to your eye, you do this all day long. We're walking around, we are getting all our photographs nicely composed at the rule of thirds, and we're making sure that they're balanced. But you're walking around, you're photographing all day long. You go home, you upload your photographs onto your computer, and what you find is that you have a few days worth of photographs all shot from the same point of view. Now, in some cases, that might just happen to work out perfectly for you. But it's very rare that the subject happens to look good from your eye level or your head level. Every single subject is not going to work that way. Okay, so we need to have a look at different points of view, and this is a great tool to allow you to really explore more of your compositional possibilities, and it's something you should be actively thinking about when you are out shooting. Now again, if this concept is new to you, you may need to push yourself to try some different points of view when you're shooting, but after some practice this will be something you do without thinking. Okay, so point of view can be key to finding shots that may otherwise be boring or mundane if shot from a straight eye level position. So let's have a look at exactly what I mean by point of view. So here we have a shot of some trees taken from below and looking straight up, and this creates a pretty dramatic point of view and a much more interesting image than if we just captured it from straight on. If we had just captured this from straight on, we could still get a good photograph, but this just adds something completely different to it. Sorry, excuse me. So it may seem simple, but just by looking up when you're shooting, you can completely change the subject that you were looking at. Now, you might even, find a new subject that you weren't even aware of, and you can think about if you're walking around, and a lot of people saying they like to do street photography. If you're walking around, if you simply look up and you look up at the buildings that are above you, you never know what you might find. So when you're out and about with your camera, make the conscious decision to look up, okay? And this can change the perspective and the typical view of things that we are used to seeing. And getting down low with your camera, again, this can create a total different point of view as well. Okay, so a low angle can give much more emphasis and depth to subjects that you wouldn't get from standing looking down at the subject. Okay, so if you actually get lower, like on these train tracks here as well, it can create new perspectives and create views that you wouldn't typically see. You've also got these lovely lines leading us through the photograph. We'll speak about those leading lines in the on-demand lesson on Friday as well. Okay, so, but this is what creates visual interest for the viewer as they get to see things from a whole new angle. If you're out walking and you don't have a camera on you, you're not perhaps going to get down, low to some type of subject. So as photographers, you know, you're showing the world to people in a different way. So getting your camera really low is a great way to experiment. Often you can just leave your camera down on the ground or at the level of the subject that you are shooting as well. And you can just press the button and tweak the position of the camera with each shot to improve the composition. If you have a camera that has a rotating LCD screen, these are really, really useful as well, you know, because you can get a bit lower without having to get too low. Those rotating LCD screens and so on, they're really, really important. John has just typed in a really, really good comment there. John has said, can you make sure people get permission to take pictures near railway lines? John, that's really, really good. Okay. So guys, if you are photographing railway lines, try and get permission and just be careful as well. You need to be really, really careful. Don't put yourself in harm's way for a shot like this. Okay. You know, obviously you need to be very, very careful. You know, these lines could be electrified. You know, sometimes you know, train safety. You do need to be very, very careful. So it's a good one, John. Thanks for reminding me about that as well. Okay, and Justina, you're saying this is particularly important for babies and pets and so on. Getting down to their level. We'll actually look at that now in just a moment too. So, point of view can create different feelings in an image as well. This is a really terrific shot from a Russian photographer named Alexander Rodchenko. And Alexander Rodchenko was a pioneer of different angles when it came to photographing. And you may not think it, but you know, there was a point where someone decided they would look up or they would look down when they were photographing. You know, photographs were all taken from eye level with the head looking forward and so on. But Alexander Rodchenko, and particularly because of the rise of SLR cameras as well, really started to explore his angles and point of view. And point of view can create different feelings in an image, okay? Shooting people from below can give the subject a higher status or a sense of power, okay? So, I mean, what do we think about this photograph? You know, I mean, looking at this, how do we feel towards this person? This looks like someone who's full of confidence. This looks like someone who is you know, I don't know, there's just a lot of power from the shot, okay? So again, this is something you can create yourself to apply to your images when you are capturing them. You have a huge amount of influence about how you represent a person in a photograph. You know, and this is just simply by lowering ourselves and shooting upwards to give this sense of power. So, I mean, if you think even about statues, you know, statues of people, and they're usually high up, they're on a pedestal, and again, that's to give the impression of power. You know, it's the exact same way if we photograph somebody from a lower angle. And it's the opposite as well if we're shooting from above. If the subject is smaller in the frame, therefore there's a sense that the viewer is in a higher position than the subject perhaps, okay? So in this particular photograph, we're looking down on this person, and that might, you know, convey a particular message to us. We might think that this person's perhaps slacking a little bit, or maybe just relaxing, or so on. It might, yeah, you just said it there, relaxed, and so on. But we don't get a sense of power from this person, even though they're wearing the shirt and tie and so on. There's not the same sense of power or anything like that as we saw when we were shooting from a lower angle. Okay, so even just shooting up or down, if we're shooting somebody, it really has a big effect on how we represent that person. So there will be times when you cannot capture a whole lot from your current position as well, and maybe cannot even move to get better pictures too. So, I mean, if you're ever at a concert, and I know photographing at concerts is actually particularly tricky now as well. Generally, if you go into a concert with an SLR camera, you're in danger that they'll take the camera away from you, okay? But you know, if you do get into a concert, or perhaps you're using a point and shoot or something, something like that. You might be in a situation where you're in the crowd and a lot of people asking, is this a fisheye lens? Absolutely, it is a fisheye lens, okay? But a little trick to gain yourself some height or just to get new perspective is to simply hold the camera above your head. Holding the camera above your head, this can be great to get you out of a tricky situation, especially anywhere where there's a crowd that you are in, or you're stuck somewhere at the same height as all the other people. Just getting the camera up there and taking a shot. The interesting thing about this type of point of view, it feels that you're really in the action, you're a part of the action. Kim, you've just said it, you are there. Absolutely. And that's what's great about this type of photograph, is that you're more engaged with what is going on. If you were higher up, say on the balcony, or something similar to the previous shot, you're going to have a bit of a disconnection. You're not going to have the same feeling of connection and engagement. Now, fisheye lenses are great for this type of thing as well, because you just get so much within the photograph. You definitely want to try and shoot wide if you're doing this type of photography as well, as wide as possible when you are in a crowd. Now, so always considering the level of the subject that you are shooting can be very important as well, again, to create that feeling of engagement between the viewer and the subject. So in this shot, okay, I got right down to this little guy, got very, very low, to the same level as this guy here, and I was able to get the eyes looking towards the camera to create a sense of perspective and what this little guy sees from his view of the world. Okay, what I like about this as well is if you get somebody looking at the camera or something looking at the camera like this, you've also got a little bit of a connection between them as well. What they say about the eyes and so on. So something looking at the camera gives you that added little bit of connection too. But just getting down as low as this guy as well gives you an idea of the world that this little lizard, this little gecko lives in. So this image just would not work if you were to photograph it from above. If you imagine if we were trying to approach this particular photograph all the way from above this subject, he's going to be so small within the scene, and we've got less engagement with him as well. Now, Justina mentioned this a little bit earlier on as well. This is particularly effective when working with people. It's used a lot when taking shots of children and babies. Getting down to their level or their height allows you to connect better with them, and therefore they're going to connect better with the camera and engage with the viewer. This also allows to create an accurate sense of perspective as well. Looking down over a subject can create a strange perspective, and often it'll create unflattering angles as well. So always consider this and play with heights you shoot at. This is a very basic guideline. Keep the subject at eye level. So, if you're photographing somebody very tall, you want to try and get to their level somehow. If you're photographing a child or a baby, you want to try and get down to their level as well. That's if you're trying to create a nice straight shot. Like everything in photography, you can turn this completely on its head as well and do your own thing. But the main thing is to be aware of these guidelines and let them help you to solve issues that you might be having. Okay, so here is another great example of this getting down to the subject's position. This is a very, very cute photograph, but you just couldn't get something like this if you were photographing them from above. So getting down, getting to their level, and it's almost like you're entering their world. You're reminding the viewer as well of what it was like to be a child as well. And it just simply would not work if we were photographing this from a higher perspective. And Stephen and Dawn saying they love this as well. Deb, you said you're used to this after raising my kids, getting down to their level. Absolutely. If you've got children, you definitely want to try this out yourself with them. Getting down to their level, getting into their world. Great, so we've only got a couple of more slides to have a look at before we finish up this lesson now as well, and we'll do our Q&A too. So I know we're coming up to the hour. My apologies, I know I had to take a bit of a break there during the lesson as well. But we're nearly done, and we'll have our Q&A as usual as well. So simplicity is the final thing we'll have a look at in this evening's lesson. And It's pretty, pretty self-explanatory, okay? So like we discussed earlier, our vision makes us focus on a small area when we are looking. And when the camera is up to our eye, we may not even notice things creeping into the frame, like those branches that we saw earlier on in the trees coming in on the right and so on. So this is why it's important to run our eyes around the frame to make sure nothing is creeping in. But this is really important as well when we're trying to use simplicity in our photographs, okay? Isolating subjects and making the shot simple creates images that the subject is very obvious to the viewer and the only thing the viewer has to think about. Sometimes you might see things that are just visually interesting because of their shape, their form, maybe their texture, or simply their colours. There may not be anything deep or meaningful or some message behind the image. You might just be interested in purely in the shape or the form of a particular object, like these traffic lights here. So you might have just captured something because it's visually interesting to you, and simplicity can really help with this. So in this image here, if we were to imagine a wide shot with the street or more of the urban environment, then we might take away from something that you were just simply snapped because it looked interesting. Okay, the same idea with this here. Isolating this leaf helps emphasize it to the viewer, the little things that you saw in it. You know, this leaf is amongst 100,000 other leaves in the world, but it just wouldn't stand out if it was just a big pile of leaves. But isolating the leaf on its own makes us engage or think about it in a different way. And again, you can clearly identify the subject and just enjoy the simple form and the texture and the shape. And the viewer doesn't have to overthink the picture. Okay, they don't have to try and figure out anything else about the photograph. And the plain background here as well really, really helps here with it too. And finally, simplicity has a really nice way of creating harmony and ease and serenity in a photograph as well. What do you think about this photograph? What do you feel when you look at a photograph like this, guys? Yeah, absolutely. Just waiting on some more answers to come in there as well. Yeah, it's peaceful. It's a serene photograph, a harmonious photograph. This boat is, the boat in this image is strong enough as to form, to sit alone in this shot. It doesn't need anything else around it. It's a very, very calming photograph, okay? It doesn't need anything else. Anything else in this picture is going to make it busy, and it wouldn't be so simple. We don't need anything else to enjoy this picture. So simplicity can really help us calm down. Photography has a great way, if we look at a photograph or perhaps a photograph that we're taking, of just relaxing. A great way of escaping, the pressures and the stresses of life. So a photograph like this can have a really, really calming effect on us. And it's all to do with the composition, all to do with the simplicity of the shot. So that's it, guys. So just to summarize what we had a look at this evening. So we had a look at some new compositional skills and techniques. We explored the rule of thirds, and we spoke about that, remember guys, as being a guideline, a compositional guideline for our photographs. Do apply it to your photography, and you will see an improvement in your composition straight away. If you have that grid on the back of the camera, do put it on. It's very, very useful. Refer to your camera's manual if you're unsure of where you may find that, okay? We had a look at the importance of visual awareness, and we spoke about balance in our photographs and how important it is to have balance in our pictures, and how each element of the photograph carries a compositional weight. Okay, and that these compositional weights can have a big effect on where the viewer looks at in our photographs. So do be aware of balance in your photographs. We also improved our compositional vocabulary and our photographic vocabulary as well. Adding new terms to how we can describe photographs, and perhaps understanding now some compositional techniques as well that, if we're looking at anybody else's pictures, we may be able to find in their photographs. So I'm sure you're going to have you're going to look at photographs in a completely different way now. Okay, and then we had to look at, it's important to expand our